Hello, and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I am super excited, y'all, this week to have my bestie, Kaely, as a guest on this week's episode. And we are going to be talking about making informed decisions in sleep and how you can't do that if you don't know all your options, or what's safe and what's not safe, or what to do if your plan sort of A doesn't work and doesn't go to plan. So Kaely is my bestie, like for real. We're super close friends, but she is also an amazing, actually in real life, but she's also an amazing doula educator and doula coach. Kaely, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a guest on your podcast finally.
I know it's taken us forever. We've been like, we need to do an episode together. We need to do an episode. And then we're like, what do we do it on?
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, some of you might, I don't remember if I mentioned any of my podcasts. Anyway, I've been really sick this fall. And so I've been very like, bleh on ideas. I was like, Kaely, give me some podcast ideas. So here we are. Kaely, I like half introduced you. Do you want to do an intro? That's usually what I let folks do, and introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Kaely Harrod, as Kim mentioned, best friends with this lovely coach here that you have, this lovely podcast host that you have. And I am here in the DC area. I have 3 kiddos that are 14, 13, and 11. And I am a doula, postpartum and birth doula, childbirth educator, and I teach doulas about business strategy and sustainability, because doula work is a really high burnout field. And so in order for us to be successful and sustainable, we have to be really strategic about that. And so that's a big piece of my business at this point. And Kim and I have a connection initially from La Leche League, and we actually became leaders at the same time, but in different states.
Yep.
And then that's how we first met when I moved here to the DC area. And then it all kicked off from there. And now we're best friends.
God, like seriously.
It's been 9 years next week that we've lived here.
Has it?
Yeah. Emira's was 2.
Weird. Yeah. Okay, that's just weird.
That's wild, right? It's so strange. We've lived here longer than anywhere else. That's so weird.
That is wild.
Yeah.
So Kaely and I are both super passionate about informed choice, and we like to, have these big feisty conversations about this on a regular basis. This podcast episode in many ways is just a sneak peek into a conversation that we have on many topics in many ways related to birth and early parenting on the regular.
Yeah, every Monday we vent about something. One of our fields.
We have a standing coffee date. We try most Mondays to grab coffee together. That's how we start our week. It's a nice perk of working for yourself.
Highly recommend it.
Creating your own schedule. So I think the really challenging thing when it comes to so many parenting topics, right? But when it comes to sleep in particular, because we are so like AAP, safe sleep focused, or because we have such narrow ways that we talk about your options when it comes to how to manage sleep or how to make changes when things aren't sustainable, it's really hard to make informed decisions because you're actively not hearing all the options. And certainly social media is like an echo chamber, and you're not going to be presented with a fair range of options. And our healthcare providers also often aren't giving us a full range of options when it comes to, to sleep as well.
Yeah, one of the things I like to say is, in the baby pregnancy, birth, baby, and like older toddler space, anytime someone says something like all parents should X, unless it's a safety issue and like all parents should like put their kids in car seats in a car, feed them
Mm-hmm.
every day, like the basic things. But otherwise, like I think you should always be a little weary of that because I see so many people preaching a strong message based on one child experience. And as a parent of
Mm-hmm.
three who has three very different personalities, very different sleep structures for them all throughout their lives, very different needs in terms of attachment and closeness and interaction and affection and all of that. There is so little that we can just apply to every single baby across the board, And when it
Absolutely.
comes to sleep, there's actual safety issues when we don't teach anything about any other sleep scenario except a baby being alone in their own bed. And so few babies like that. And so lots of parents get into the desperation place of like, we've got to get some sleep and then do dangerous things because they don't know that they actually can do it safely. No one has ever said that to them.
And that's why I teach so many different variations of safe sleep in my
Yes.
newborn sleep class, right? That I teach regularly, and what not to do that can never be made safe. No
Yeah.
judgment, but like we have to talk about these things because otherwise you just don't know them. They're not common knowledge
Yeah.
and they're not commonly talked about even when it comes to baby sleep.
Yeah. Well, and we talk about, I mean, the like safe sleep lingo in the US is so focused on never bed sharing. It doesn't
Abstinence
give any
only.
nuance for when that can be good and helpful.
Hmm.
But also, I think what ends up happening is that if we're just talking about a baby in the bed with you, then, I mean, you and I went into this in great detail the other day, but like a recliner, a couch, someone who's on sleeping meds, like these are scenarios that are actually incredibly dangerous all the time, every time someone
Yes.
does it. But because that's not like included in the lingo about dangerous sleep, then that's something that people are like, well, it's not that thing that they said was unsafe. And so therefore I'll do it when
Hmm.
in fact it is way less safe than doing the thing that is like kind of demonized in the first place.
And I mean, it's a well-known in the public health world, or maybe not the public health world, maybe more like the anthropological world of studying shared mother-baby sleep or parent-baby sleep. This is
Mm-hmm.
known, right? Like this is
Yeah.
not actually an unknown concept. That the unintended consequence of the way that we in the US at least talk about bed sharing in that abstinence only way is that an effort not to bed share, but you can't get your baby back in the bassinet or crib, folks fall asleep sitting up in recliners or on the couch, even though that's the most dangerous sleeping position,
Yeah.
right? There is. But no one's
Yeah.
talking about that, which is, why I teach it and why I know that that's
Yeah.
something that you know and would tell a
Yeah.
client if you were working with them and saw them doing that. But like I was just having this conversation in a sleep class last time where I had a parent be like, wait, back up, Kim. Can you tell me more about why that's safe? Well, not safe. And I was like, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
can totally tell you more, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no way to make this safe, and I
Yeah.
went through all the like the nooks, the crannies, the softness, the dropping, the smothering, like all
Yeah.
the different ways, versus if
Totally.
even if you were sleeping on a bed, like the different ways, different positions in a bed that somebody might sleep with a baby and kind of contrast them. And she was just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I'm like, "Mhm, it does."
Yeah. So one of the things that I see with my clients frequently is that they kind of hit this road bump where they're like, okay, now we sort of have this shame around asking if there are other scenarios where a baby can sleep or admitting that we've done things that we think are maybe not safe to do, right? Out of desperation.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is the biggest, like as educators and as professionals, we have got to help families have that scenario less often because that truly is dangerous. And it's the space where people didn't even feel the freedom to reach out because they're like, my baby's in bed with me and like, you're probably going to tell me that's bad, but I don't sleep otherwise. Instead of being like, I know that sometimes this is safe. Am I a safe person to do this before I ever try to do it? Because it happens for almost everybody. It happens at some point, especially when someone's breastfeeding, because middle of the night feeds, you're tired. Maybe you're feeding in bed, and then you wake up and like, oh, damn, I fell asleep with the baby.
Mm-hmm. I
And
mean,
in that moment, you don't know, you haven't planned for it. So you don't know if you're doing it safely or not,
yep.
which is so problematic.
This is why the UK now educates everybody on safer bed sharing.
Yes.
Every single family, regardless of feeding method, gets
Yes.
education now. It's like
Yes.
they're so smart, they're moving in the correct direction. It's like part of NHS guidelines.
Yes. Which it needs to be. Because some people truly are not safe to do it. Some people do not have a safe mattress. Some people have a partner in bed with them that is on medication that makes them unsafe. Like there
Or
are
is this or is a
scenarios.
smoker, or
Yeah.
they have pets in bed with them, right?
Yeah.
Or they have
Yeah.
older siblings in bed. And that one we can troubleshoot a little on an individual basis, depending on the nuance, but like also
Yeah.
can be really dangerous. Um,
Totally.
lots of options. I mean, I know I will fully admit to bed sharing with my oldest, but I wasn't
Yeah.
bed sharing, right? Like when he was a newborn,
Yeah.
falling asleep with him, where before I really knew what was safe with bed sharing because
Yeah.
no one
Same.
had taught me. And I would just,
Yeah.
fall asleep with him, even though
Yeah.
I was not bed sharing.
100%.
Absolutely not.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. That's how our journey started as well. Of like, no, we're definitely not. We never will. Why would we? That's not safe. And then like, oh damn, he slept in bed with us again. Yeah.
Hmm.
But also like I had a moment with my oldest where, so he's 14 now, so he is alive and well, thank goodness. But I woke up and the covers were also covering him. And it was
Mm,
covering him, but like kind of above him because it was between my husband and I, and he was between us. And that was the time when I was like, okay, we either can't do this ever on accident or we like do it without the covers on the bed because we are not doing it well. And it
hmm.
really freaked me out because I was like, that would have been really, really bad. Like, this is a dangerous situation. But also, it was a direct result of us being like, it's not going to happen. Obviously, I'm just going to take him back and put him back in bed and then not doing it, just falling
Yeah.
asleep out of exhaustion.
Yeah. I say this a lot when I'm teaching my newborn sleep class. Like, if no one's ever taught you how to do it safely and you're desperate, you're probably not doing it safely at 3 in the morning,
No,
right?
because
You're
you're
just
also
not.
exhausted in that moment. Yeah.
And you don't even know. Like, you don't even often know that
No,
you're doing something dangerous. Like, this stuff isn't
no.
obvious.
Well, and I mean, you're exhausted. So you also like fall asleep on accident. I mean, that's the thing is that it's a scenario where we have to be intentional about it because otherwise we're going to wake up like I did of like, oh shit, I guess I fell asleep with the baby in the bed. Yeah, so part of why I am so passionate about it is because I think my own experience was that I was sure that I would not fall asleep on accident, and I did many times. And then somehow still thought I wouldn't, which makes no sense. And then I see that with my clients so much where they'll say, like, oh, we were exhausted. She didn't want to sleep. And so one of us like sat propped up with the baby on our chest and slept like that. And I'm like, no, that is
That's,
really not safe.
yeah.
And they're like, it's the only way she would sleep. I'm like, okay, then like that's still not safe just because it's the only way she'll sleep. We've got to find a different solution for you because that is for sure not it. She could just roll off you and the bed. Like the whole situation is bad.
What I tend to see
So
in my clients is dozing off in like gliders
yep.
while sleeping. I'm while
Mm-hmm.
feeding. Goodness. Dozing off while sleeping. Dozing off while feeding their baby.
Yep.
But also being so scared to bed share because the messaging that they also intentionally are sleeping in like a glider or recliner
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
bed sharing because
Right.
they're so anxious about it because we're not talking about this piece of safe sleep.
Yeah.
And so the way that they are perceiving risk doesn't line up with the actual statistics of risk. And
Yeah.
that's hard because our brains latch on to certain things. And sometimes, no matter like even being presented with the actual facts, doesn't change the way your brain wants to perceive risk. And that can
Totally.
be really hard to grapple with.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I remember as a parent was kind of realizing we maybe were good candidates for this and it was like potentially safe for us to do, right? And that it didn't mean the baby was going to be in our bed for the rest of forever. Like, of course, as a new parent, and I was a fairly young parent, like he was born, I was only 23. And so some part of me was like, well, I know that I will like ruin him forever if we have him in bed with us, because imagine he'll never be able to sleep independently. Newsflash, he sleeps fine.
I mean, I don't think
But
that's exclusive to being a young parent.
no, probably not. But I was especially susceptible to being like, we will mess it up, you know?
Hmm.
I had these wild swings from like ridiculous arrogance about things I shouldn't have been arrogant about to like really ridiculous panics around things that I was like, this is for sure going to be it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, if it's helpful, I think I can kind of share the progression that we went through to get to that place. And also like how I think it's helped me have a more nuanced view with my clients.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I love about how you've dealt with sleep across your kiddos is it's all very different. And I think when
Yeah.
we're thinking about informed decision, like safe sleep is such a big one because there are like actual risks, right? Safety risks. But like informed decision making in sleep and not having all the information isn't just about safe sleep. Like I just want to stress that point that like it is
Yeah.
also like when things are hard and you're struggling, like what are all your options to support
Yeah.
better sleep, right? Like what are all your options, around other pieces of sleep? There's still a lack of informed decision making.
Yeah.
Um, you know, just to kind of
Yeah.
highlight that this is about so many pieces of sleep and the baby and toddler
Yeah.
years and early parenting. Yeah, go
Yeah.
for
Well,
it.
and I mean, your kid's personality plays such a big role in that as well, you
Oh my
know?
God. Like one of the biggest predictors of
Yeah.
how the whole thing's going to unfold.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, us as new parents to one baby, you know, or for our brand new first baby, we thought we just were amazing at helping him sleep because he was the great sleeper. And we're like, look at us, everyone should do what we're doing because I don't know what your problem is, but we have an amazing sleeper. And we did like a version of sleep training with him, which is honestly something that I regret, but it was like fairly mild because he was already an amazing sleeper. So he was kind of like, fine, I'll sleep at 9. You know, like we were just like, we want you to go to bed at 9. He's like, I don't know. I don't like this idea for like one night, you know? And then, I mean, he was a baby, so he was crying is what it was. Like he wasn't discussing it with us. But then the second night he was like, okay, fine, I'll sleep at 9, you know? And I was just like, I don't know what people are talking about. It's so easy to do. Like, what's wrong with you guys? And then I had another baby and he did not sleep ever, really. And our pediatrician was like, did you think that your oldest was normal? Because he's not. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, he sleeps like 16 to 18 hours a day. Like, that is not normal. And I was like, what? And she's like, no, it's not because of you guys. It's because of him. He sleeps a lot. That's a him thing. Like, that's not you as amazing parents. And I was just like, my whole life is a lie.
Pausing here to highlight. So your oldest was a high sleep needs kiddo
Yeah,
and
totally.
a pretty easygoing temperament,
Yes.
and also responded in about the best case scenario to the
Yeah,
behavioral strategy that you used.
exactly.
So that is
Yeah.
like kind of a win-win-win all around. This is
It's
like
an anomaly in every
an
way. Yeah.
anomaly of babies, right? Like
Yes.
exactly what your pediatrician said, but just highlighting the different points there a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And with our second, I mean, we lived in a tiny house, you know, he had very different needs, wanted to be attached to me at all times, literally and figuratively. And he also did not sleep great in bed with us. So it was a really weird situation where I was
Oh, that's a
like,
tough
you just
one.
don't sleep well anywhere.
Yeah.
And like you have to have a boob in your mouth at all times. And so sleeping with me makes the most sense. But like we got to a point where he would sleep half the night on his own in our bedroom and we slept on the futon downstairs. And then when he woke up, his first wake up, he would join us in bed because he would get a longer first stretch if he slept alone. But
Mm-hmm.
then after that, he needed to just like graze for the rest of the night. And I just like our mattress was up against a wall, and he and I just kind of slept on the side slash corner, you know, like where there was a wall because he was a wild baby. Like he learned to walk at 9 months, so it was dangerous to be on a surface of any kind, you know. And so it was a scenario where we're like, this is not something that we're now preaching to everyone. Like, you know what you should do is sleep on your couch because your 1 year old wants your bedroom. And then you should have him join you in the middle of the night on the couch. I mean, it was just, and it wasn't a couch. It was a futon. It was an actual sleep surface that was safe. But then in our mattress in our bedroom, we couldn't just have him on the mattress with me. Like, it needed to be up in the corner for him not to roll out because he was such a wild little dude,
And
and
just to
still is.
highlight there that lots of families, some of the logistics specific to your setup might be
Yeah.
less common. And like there would be like now, if I was your sleep coach back then when he was a baby, we'd probably tweak that setup a little bit, at
Yeah.
least with a baby, like a baby, not to have it against the wall.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but a lot of people do that first stretch separate. And at first or
Yeah.
second wake, bed share for the rest of the night. Like that
Yeah.
hybrid is actually quite common.
Yeah. Well, and my brain from those times is a little bit like on the fuzzy
Fuzzy.
side, but I'm fairly certain he was like 4 or 5 months when we started the bed in the corner situation, because that's about when he got like scary mobile, when we were like, why is this happening so early? But he wasn't a brand spanking new baby. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he was a few months old at that point for sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're silly boys.
I know. Well, and
Opposites.
then our littlest one, Emrys, lived in our bed for 3.5 years. So that's the moral of the story here. It's like we go from one extreme to the other. But when she came, we were sort of like, who knows how she'll sleep, which was really helpful for us because we had more context around the fact that people are different and babies are different and we don't control things. And
Yeah.
so we're like, okay, well, if she sleeps well with us, we know how to do that safely. If she wants to sleep in her own bed, like in, a little bassinet in our room, we also know how to do that safely. If she does half and half, we know how to do that safely. We didn't
Mm-hmm.
entirely anticipate that she would sleep with us for 3 years, but we also moved in the midst of that. And we were like, no one's trying to make a life shift, like kicking the baby out of the bed as we move, So
Yep.
part of it was like, oh, we're going to extend this until I feel ready to set this boundary. And we had like a safe toddler rail on the side of the bed to keep her from rolling off. So we had a whole setup that worked really well for us. And it just ended up that she like slept amazing with us and then therefore like literally shared the bed with us for 3.5 years. And there were times, of course, where she was like fussy or kind of, she was an octopus sleeper, we like to say, because she would just like starfish all over the bed. We'd wake up with like a foot in our head and, we're like, oh my God, and like readjust her and then wake up again. She's like somewhere else on the bed. She's wild. But my husband would basically be like, if she's going crazy to the point that neither of us can sleep and she doesn't need to eat, he would get up and take her and like walk around the house a bit and like bounce her and get her to go back to sleep and then come back in bed with her. And I think the number of times she slept in another bed until she was 3.5 or like maybe twice, like just never, like, but
Yeah.
also I wasn't away from her because I really couldn't be because she just slept with me and my boobs. Like that was, that
Yeah.
was our whole setup. So.
I also want to highlight for those of you with littles that bed sharing until 3 is globally normative and like not actually that long. If
Yeah.
you like were to survey bed sharing families, that's not to say that
Yeah.
like many families don't intervene before that if that's not your cup of tea.
Yeah.
But like Kaely, I love that you highlighted, right? You had a big move in there, which is like
Mm-hmm.
totally upends a toddler's life.
Yeah.
And we don't need two big back-to-back kind of life-altering things like where you're sleeping and a whole new move.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and the parents need to be settled in to be able to support through a big shift like that. So like things like
Yeah.
that affect how you choose to navigate other big changes, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
and so we'll have timelines that might look differently than we otherwise would because of, you know,
Yep.
other life events.
Yeah. And to your point, like Liam started sleeping in a bedroom with our oldest Jabari at like about 11, 12 months. And that worked. Like it worked fine for him to go to sleep at the same time as Jabari. And then he and Jabari woke up at the crack of dawn and giggled at each other for like 2 hours.
Oh my God, that's
And
hilarious.
then if he woke up early, he would come back in bed and feed and like kind of hang out in the bed with us. But it got to the point where like everyone wanted some morning snuggles. But actually, by the time I got pregnant with Emrys, mostly we were sleeping by ourselves. And so with her, we were sort of like, hey, listen, you can do whatever you want because at least we don't have another kid in bed still,
Yep. No more babies.
Yeah, and he had kind of self-weaned really early, and I decided to wean her close to 3 years because I was just done, like having a lot of aversion and whatnot. So there is, I think, space in there for you to also, as an individual parent, decide like, okay, now's the time for my sake that one of these things is shifting, and then kind of set up some scaffolding around that.
Yep.
But also know that like there's not a magical time, like there's
Yep.
not like an age that you arrive to. I mean, she
Yep.
was still kind of pissed when I kicked her out of the bed at 3.5. And when she
I mean, that's
weaned,
Emrys, right?
oh, totally. I mean, she was like, what is happening? And my husband was on board with like, he's basically going to do all the nighttime soothing because with me, she was just like ripping my clothes off, and I was like, girl, like nanas are over, they're closed, they're done, they're empty, all the things. And she was just like, you're lying, I know there's milk in there somewhere.
But I love like kind of thinking through the different stages of like how we piece together navigating these big changes, right? And
Yeah.
by the time you're navigating this with Emrys, with your youngest, you
Mm-hmm.
have the experience of two other kiddos,
Yeah.
but also like, just having been a mom for a while. And,
Mm-hmm.
I think what a lot of parents are lacking is realizing that they have options for how to navigate these things,
Yes.
right? And there isn't going to be a
Yes.
perfect window. And there's different ways you could choose to navigate them based on your kiddo, but also based on what feels doable to you. Or like you had mentioned, like having aversion,
Yeah.
that might step up a weaning timeline, right? Over
Yeah.
something else. Versus if
Right.
you're like, whatever, nursing's fine. Like I'm
Yeah.
not really that fussed by it. I'm happy to
Yeah.
continue. Then like that might not have been your priority and you might have focused on something else. And
Yeah.
so we're thinking like, okay, how do we make informed decisions of like how do we know our options, right? We have to kind of know
Mm-hmm.
like there are different ways of thinking through these things. And I think if you're your average parent, maybe not listening to this podcast, you're only going to hear a sleep training option.
Yeah.
You're not going to hear, like, don't worry about any of these things as a baby, right? Like, tackle them when it comes. And there are lots of ways to night wean or to stop bed sharing.
Yeah.
And there isn't a perfect which you do first. And it's really about like the context of your
Yeah.
family that you navigate
Yeah.
these decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also really important to highlight for yourself that there's not a correct way for your child. Like, I think even
Yeah.
in my experiences with my three kiddos, right? Like, the things that we did worked for us in the things that were most important to us, right? Like, I talk about the starfishing, and I have a sister who's like, doesn't have kids, and she's also like, how in the world did you ever sleep? You know why we had this conversation is that she shared a bed with Emrys at one point when Emrys was like 8 or so on family vacation. She was like, dear God, how did you sleep with this child for 3 years? And I'm like, yeah, it was rough.
That's
But
funny.
also like it worked, and for us, we were like, well, the kicking in the back is like less of a big deal than you like screaming, and so we'll
Yeah.
we'll
Or
deal with
getting
it.
up a bunch of times a night, like,
Exactly. Like I can just roll over and pull my boob out and we're good. Like I can handle the kicking in the face.
hmm
But for someone else, they might be like, I can't sleep at all because you move so freaking much. And that's not a right or wrong. Like that is just a you temperament, a partner, if you have a partner temperament and your kiddo, and how does that all mesh together? What is your scenario? And I think the biggest takeaway in my mind is that there isn't a perfect setup that just gets to applied to people. And that when
hmm
we do that, we just set people up for failure because you are not me and your partner is not my partner and your kid is not my kid. And even this kid to the next kid. And it's not as simple, although that would be great. I mean, I'd love it to be that simple, to be like, apply these 4 steps to all babies.
hmm
But that's not how it actually ever works because babies are individual people
Yep.
and we are individual parents.
Yep. And it's like, what
So,
are your options for how to like sleep safely? What are your options how to maximize sleep? What are your options for how to
yeah.
navigate a transition that you want to make or a change,
Hmm.
right? Like, what are your options for how to put together several? And these are all like context, right? And so a lot of times, like when
Yep.
I get a client who wants to do a few things like, what's the perfect order? And I'm like, well, there isn't a perfect order, like you're saying, right?
Right.
It kind of depends on what's going on and what's feeling more urgent, or what do I think we're going to get a faster win on, right? Like sometimes we'll do it on what
Totally.
feels worse. Like, are you having really bad nursing aversion? We should probably work on nursing first. But it also
Right.
might be, actually, I think moving your kiddo to their own bed is going to be pretty easy. Let's get a win so we get some
Yeah.
confidence and see some
Totally.
forward movement
Yeah.
rather than getting bogged down in something that is probably going to be hard and take longer right off the bat, right? So it's kind of different ways
Yeah.
of looking at it. And I think
Yep.
fundamentally, I feel like I should know what my own podcast episodes are. So I'm just going to chalk this up to y'all. This has been a really rough fall for me. Feel like I just had a podcast episode released some point in October on like why we can't have one size fits all sleep conversations and they need to be
Yeah.
nuanced. And like this is kind of the same thing, right?
Yes.
Like we have to have all the information to make informed choices. Informed choices are absolutely essential as, supporting informed decision making. Every single solitary person who gives you sleep information, particularly if they're professional, should be supporting
Yeah.
informed decision making, and they're not, and that's a huge, huge pet
Yeah.
peeve of mine. Um,
Yeah.
but like to do that, you actually have to look at the context and have a nuanced conversation. There isn't informed decision making that's like total just boom, 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 blanket
Yeah.
conversations, unless it's
Right.
something simple like, yes, it is normal for your 6-month-old to wake 2 to 3 times a night. Like,
Yeah.
I guess that,
Right.
I mean, like simple information like that we can do.
Right.
But like more
Yeah.
complex situations, it takes a whole conversation to dig in to make sure you
Yeah.
have all the information that you need in the way that you need it.
Yeah. Well, and some troubleshooting, right? Like along the
Mm-hmm.
way, you need to be able to be like, is this how this is supposed to look? Because if this is your first time trying out whatever your method is, you're also going to have some moments of being like, maybe we're just doing it wrong, which might be the
Yep.
case. Like maybe you are, but also maybe it's just that kids are weird. So
I say that all the time. Babies are weird. Toddlers are weird.
totally,
Parents
they're
just gotta
so
laugh at me. They're
strange.
like, it's true. We don't always have a logical explanation for all the behavior. Like
Yeah,
sometimes it's just weird. They're just
babies are
weird things.
weird.
And
Yeah.
like, okay, like
Yeah. You're
what do
like,
you
why do
do?
they like that thing? I don't know. That doesn't make any sense,
Why did
but
they
here
do
we
that
are.
weird thing at bedtime
Yeah.
one night, but not other nights? I don't know. Like I
Yeah.
just we're not gonna know.
Yeah.
We just gotta accept it.
Yeah.
But I like
Yeah.
I think that like oh I lost my train of thought. I think that like knowing, right, that like sometimes even once you've made your decision, there's some adjusting and troubleshooting or
Yep.
giving it more time or um,
Hmm.
you know, navigating bumps in the road that come from development or sickness or all these things. Like that's part of, I feel like that's part of just informed
Yeah.
decision making that like it's almost rarely just a
Totally.
straight path through something. Even with bed sharing, even if it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
where do we sleep with our baby? Well, it might not be the same thing every night. Right? Like once
Yeah.
I started bed sharing with my kids, I bed share with my kids because I'm lazy, and it worked. And so I wasn't getting out of bed at night.
Yeah.
And if for some reason
Right.
my kiddos didn't settle with nursing and a snuggle in bed, then I did exactly what you did, and my husband was in charge of soothing them and bringing them back to bed. And that was kind of our deal because I did all the other
Yeah.
nighttime parenting with the understanding that if I needed him, he was 100 million% on board. It was easier for me, and I deal better with disrupted sleep than he does. So he did lots and lots of other things, I promise, to balance out the load.
Yeah.
But
Totally.
like for a lot of people, it's not a one and done decision. It is a bit of a negotiation based on the phase and a lot of hybrid. You start the night in your crib and then
Yeah.
some point in the night, maybe it's
Yeah.
midnight, maybe it's 4 a.m. And maybe that varies a lot night to night.
Yeah.
We start bed sharing. And that stuff's okay too. And I
Right.
think just part of making those decisions is they don't have to be absolute and black and white for a lot of things, as long as they're being safe and intentional.
Right.
A lot of
Yeah.
babies can handle some fluidity here, and having some fluidity here can
Hmm.
make it better for parent sleep.
Yeah. Well, and be curious about your own needs too, because I kind of
Mhm.
vaguely mentioned with Emrys that I got to a point of having aversion, which is essentially like for me, it was like latching just felt like super cringy. Like it was just like, oh.
I'm
And
folding my
then,
arms over my chest, y'all, and
yeah.
cringing because nursing version is
Yeah, when
so
you're just like,
terrible.
oh, don't
Oh,
touch me. Yeah. But it didn't happen until she was like 2.5, you know? And I briefly had a moment of like, what is wrong with me? Like, I've been doing this for 2.5 years and it's been fine. What is happening now? And I thankfully had some support for folks to be like, no, no, this is not weird. You know, you're not abnormal, but this is your reality now. And so what does that look like for your timeline of weaning? Do you want to keep
yes.
going? Do you want to not keep going? And so I think that's also true in parenting, that like we're learning alongside them, right? And we have to be sort of open to our needs and desires shifting a bit as well. And what's working, like if it stops working, the biggest thing is for you to have the freedom to figure out a new thing that does work, rather than
Yes.
be like, that's the only thing that's available. And so we're going to do it, even though it's not working, because
Yes.
that's not true. Like very few scenarios, this is your only option, you know?
Curious about your baby or toddler's experience, curious about your own experience, and curious if you have a
Yeah,
partner about their experience,
totally.
right? Because all there's just so much shifting and changing,
Yeah.
for everybody.
Yeah.
What your baby needs is going to change, what you need and the way you feel is
Yeah.
going to change. If you have a partner, what they
Mm-hmm.
need is going to change too.
100%.
And I feel like sometimes we get stuck not being aware of that to the point that we then kind of get some
Yeah.
resentment. But what we
Yeah.
really need to do is keep talking, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. For
keep
sure.
those communication lines open.
Yeah.
All right, Kaely, last thoughts. When you're thinking about helping your clients make
Mm-hmm.
informed decisions around
Mm-hmm.
sleep, what are some of the things that you find them asking about or you talking about? And this could be during
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy, because I know you do a lot of prep with your birth clients about,
Yeah.
what to expect,
Postpartum stuff. Yeah.
postpartum stuff, but
Yeah.
also when you do postpartum care or teaching a postpartum class or any of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most important thing in my mind is establishing like if what you're doing is working well, if you're already in postpartum, like I like to be like, how's that working for you? Like that's like my go-to question, because I think we all have a favorite way to do stuff
Mhm.
and we think ours is better than other people's in general. And so I like to first not come in as a person who's like, well, I know something you don't know, right? I'm sure I know a better way to do this. That's not always true. And if my clients are doing something safe and it's working for them, I just affirm the heck out of that, you know?
Mhm.
But I am always teaching about safety. I'm sharing your information. I'm sharing, your class. I'm sharing different things to help them have that groundwork of safety. And then from there, as a baby grows, just validating that like it is like, yeah, your kid doesn't tell you what they need when they need it. You're still figuring that out. That's normal. That's part of this process, you know.
Mhm.
But not kind of helping them to see right away that they can have some level of like autonomy in that, but also like they get to be the expert of this baby that just came here for the first time
Yes.
ever,
Yes.
which I think is so empowering if you're not thinking, everybody but me knows best about this kid. And so that's a big thing that I focus on is like, how is this thing safe? And also, like, second to that, how does this work for you? If you guys are happy with how it's going, great. Like, then it's working. And then you don't need just like ignore people's thoughts on it.
Mhm.
And I say, like, just don't share with people that are going to be negative about it.
Oh,
If someone's going to be like, why
that's
are
a good
you doing
tool.
it like that? Like, just don't tell them, because
Ignoring
you don't need that
people.
kind of negativity in your life.
Ignoring people is a good muscle to strengthen. Don't tell, don't share,
Totally.
ignore unless you think they're going to
Totally.
affirm you.
Yeah. Or be like, I'm so glad that worked for your kid. That is one of my go-to phrases, that I'm like, you don't know that I'm passive aggressively being like, you're an idiot. That wouldn't work for my kid. And I'm so glad that worked for you. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for feeling like you should share that with me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm making all the internal faces of like, what the hell?
Yep. Easy way to brush it off. Move the
Right.
conversation along. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I love that. And then I know you do this. I'm going to add on to this. Kaely always makes sure that her clients, and this is something I do too, right? Like just making sure that you know that there are resources down the road if things need to change.
Yes. Absolutely.
You know, and
Yeah.
that's part of being a parent, right? It's always changing.
Yep.
Always
Totally.
changing.
Yeah.
All right, Kaely, as always, I could talk to you forever because I do when we're not recording a podcast episode.
Yes.
But thank you so much for joining. And before we sort of wrap up, just give a shout out to where folks can find you. And of course, I'll get all the info and put it in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to finally be on here. If you are interested in birthy kind of stuff, I have a podcast called Doula Tips and Tits. And that's a cool way to hang out with me. My first 100 episodes are geared towards birth and postpartum for families who are delivering. And then I kind of pivoted. And then my account on Instagram is @Harrod Doula, and you can learn some fun stuff there too.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaely.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.